Sport at 7 with Damien O'Mara on RTÉ Radio 1 in association with AIB. Supporting clubs, supporting communities.
And thank you for your company this Thursday evening. It's Cycling to Start, where the sport continues to react to the publication yesterday of USADA's report, which has accused Lance Armstrong's US postal team as having run the most sophisticated, professionalised and successful doping programme that sport has ever seen. Many critics of Armstrong have commented on the issue over the past 24 hours. To start the programme tonight, we'll hear the opposing view. Sean Breen is Lance Armstrong's lawyer. He joins us from the United States. Sean, how are you?
I'm fine, Mr. O'Mara. How are you today?
Not too bad at all. Many thanks for your time. You have described the report you're quoted in the media over here today as having described this as a hatchet job. Why do you see it as so?
Well, I think you have to look at a few things. Number one, Mr. Armstrong has been targeted by this rogue agency in the United States for several years. They've spent millions of dollars solely to focus on Mr. Armstrong. They've offered unbelievable types of deals through criminal pressure, through different other sweetheart deals with riders. So it's no surprise when they come up with a report that they've written with millions of dollars that's extremely critical of Mr. Armstrong.
But who benefits from that, if that's the case?
They do. USADA does, sir, because they have to justify their existence. People here in the States know that there's been a lot of questions and political questions about this group for some time, and they need to justify their existence, and there's a few people in there who we know have a vendetta against Mr. Armstrong, and that's exactly what we're seeing here. And that's why there's been bills proposed now in the United States as a result of this case to help clean up and reform USADA.
In advance of this, would you have seen USADA as being a credible organization?
No. Never have, to be perfectly honest with you. Maybe because I'm a lawyer and some of my friends represent athletes that have been in that system. But as my law partner Tim Herman so aptly told the federal judge here in Austin, Texas, in the case that we had, you know, the Christians had better odds against the Lions than athletes do against USADA in the United States.
But if we are to believe that Lance Armstrong is an innocent man and is being scapegoated here, would this be the greatest conspiracy, not just in sport, but one of the greatest conspiracies in the history of mankind?
I don't know. I haven't gotten into that really on a level of an ethereal discussion of it. I do know that there's been several people that have said, at least from the report, that they don't believe that Postal was doing anything that any other team wasn't doing in that period in cycling. I'm certainly not saying that's true. But I do know, for instance, if you look at some of the riders who gave affidavits in the case, not a single one of those riders has said anything other than Lance Armstrong, naked or on something, was the best rider they've ever seen.
But why would so many riders tarnish their name, bring the spectre of being a cheat upon themselves in order to go after one man?
Well, they didn't. You see, that's the fallacy of this report. Not a single one of those riders came forward, other than a couple of them that have monetary issues going right now, Mr. Hamilton and Mr. Landis, who've overtly seeking money. The other riders weren't coming forward. They were targeted specifically by USADA. We have evidence that USADA has been offering deals that once they find riders who may have done something wrong, they say, hey, look, we'll let you off the hook as long as you tell us something about Lance Armstrong.
Okay, well, let's take Tyler Hamilton has a book out. It's doing quite well. Okay, there might be a financial interest there. Floyd Landis, likewise. Let's take the case of George Hincapie. His career was built on riding alongside Lance Armstrong.
It was.
Your view on his testimony?
I haven't had the opportunity to study it carefully, and I certainly haven't had the opportunity to talk with George. But I will tell you, for instance, let's take Jonathan Vaughters. In 2005, I was involved in a court case with Mr. Armstrong in the United States of America in an arbitration, and Mr. Vaughters provided testimony, voluntarily provided sworn testimony in the case that he had absolutely no knowledge of anything Mr. Armstrong had ever done or any team, including the postal team in Discovery. Now, all of a sudden, I don't know what deal's been offered to him, but he's offering testimony that's exactly the opposite. So it's impossible for me to explain to you when I don't know what the circumstances were. And the reason we don't know, Mr. O'Mara, is because USADA is so protected in terms of what they can do to athletes. Athletes have very little right to the sunshine in the case and what's involved against them in cross-examination and documents. We've been trying for months and months to get the very information that was finally issued yesterday. So it's very difficult to defend against these things in a 24-hour period when we've been trying for literally months to get the information and then to be able to get to the bottom of it.
And the argument has been put forward from supporters of Lance Armstrong that the USADA process was a flawed process. Why then not propose or go public and suggest a means of having this argument out, of bearing forth the evidence and going through it in a way that would be acceptable to both sides?
That's a great question, Mr. O'Mara, and we did propose that. We proposed to USADA, and the federal judge in the United States here in Texas proposed to USADA that we just use the current system, the jury system that's here in the United States, and have 6 jurors and the rules of evidence and the rules of procedure, and let's resolve this dispute, and USADA refused to do that.
When we combine, or when we look at the various lines of evidence and the themes throughout the report, we can question the testimony of one man against another man. We can maybe question the accuracy of scientific evidence, the money trail. But when you combine all of that together, this is a damning report and a damning case against Lance Armstrong in the minds of most people.
Well, I don't dispute that, and that's exactly what it was intended to be written as. That's the difference, you see. What people need to understand is that although you put a title on this, reasoned decision, it's neither one of those. All right, this didn't result from an impartial vetting of both sides of the facts. So Jonathan Vaughters is a perfect example of that for you, of how people can give at least initially a certain amount of testimony, but then once it's peeled back through cross-examination, you get to the bottom of what's going on. So, in Texas we say you can put lipstick on a pig, but it still remains a pig. And that's exactly, in my view, what this is. It's lipstick on a pig, and really the ship has already sailed. When Mr. Armstrong decided in August that enough was enough, and he said to the legal team to stand down, we knew this was inevitable, that they would be able to write a report that says whatever they want and paint it in the light that they want. And to him, Mr. O'Mara, Lance is perfectly comfortable. His conscience is clear. He's moved on to what his goal is, his family and his foundation, and he's perfectly understanding that when you have somebody that's unopposed, they're going to write a report like this.
But then do people have the right to come out afterwards and accuse this of being a one-sided report when Lance Armstrong decided not to cooperate fully and not to go through the full process?
I think they do, because the full process is rigged, and you shouldn't have to go through a rigged process to ultimately complain that it's rigged. And that's what the whole point of the federal lawsuit was about, and unfortunately, because of the arbitration laws in the United States, the judge dismissed it because of no jurisdiction. But he shouldn't have to go through a rigged process in order to show that it's rigged.
Do you believe he's an innocent man, or do you believe that he's been victimized for doing what everyone else in professional cycling was doing?
I believe Lance is innocent. I believe him when he says that. I believe him when he says his conscience is clear. But I also believe that he's the best athlete and rider probably in the history of cycling, certainly in the last few generations, no matter what. And
just a freak of human nature with what he was able to do.
He is absolutely a freak. I've seen it firsthand. I've studied the evidence firsthand in the medical, scientific evidence firsthand. The man is a freak.
There's an issue, and I don't know if it's a semantic debate. You might be able to shed some light on it for me. Lance Armstrong has been quoted repeatedly as having said he never failed a test. Have you ever spoken to him about, has he ever doped? There's a different issue. It's okay to say it's one argument to say I've never failed a test. It's a different argument to say I've never taken illegal substances.
Well, I think it seems to be that that's come up a lot lately, because people are trying to discount the fact that he's passed 500 to 600 tests. But the answer to your question is Mr. Armstrong has repeatedly, in a number of settings, said clearly and unequivocally he didn't dope. So, when you pass tests 500 to 600 times, and that is the system that's set up, and then 15 years later you have people filing affidavits that say he said this or I saw him do this, it's fundamentally impossible to defend against that.
But again, WADA, I don't know, do you see WADA as a credible organisation? They've come out today, they've commended USADA on the report, they've commended them on their bravery. A leading judge has talked about the due process holding up. Do you give any credence to those arguments, to those standings?
I think the history of WADA speaks for itself. WADA clearly, through Mr. Pound, although he's not formally the president anymore, has had a vendetta against Mr. Armstrong. And in fact, WADA was sanctioned for conduct relating to Mr. Armstrong previously, so it's no surprise to me that WADA is doing victory laps today.
What would you like the UCI to come out and say, or what action would you now like the UCI to take?
I think the UCI needs to look at two very important things in this, Mr. O'Mara. One is they need to look at the fact that USADA had absolutely no jurisdiction in this case. And the other is they need to look at the statute of limitations. And a lot of people don't understand how important that is, that the reason we have, for instance, in the doping cases, an 8-year statute is exactly to prevent people from going back 12, 13, 14 years and finding people or evidence that's not tests and then bringing a case in the system based on that. Under USADA's reading of a statute of limitations, if an athlete denies that they used a performance-enhancing substance, then that automatically waives the statute forever. So they could charge whoever they wanted to all the way back in time. Greg LeMond, you name them. They could go back and charge them under their theory, and it's really ridiculous. So UCI needs to take a look at that.
I've been reading quite a lot of coverage of this story in the past 24 hours, and words that have repeatedly been used with respect to Lance Armstrong: cheat, disgraced, fallen, bully, liar, serial doper. Do you believe, knowing him as you do, that his legacy will be tarnished forever as a result of the publication last night?
No, I have no doubt that it will not, because I think a lot of people realize that what he's done on the bike and what he's doing off the bike are two completely distinct things. And what he's done, what people will always argue forever, Mr. O'Mara, about what he did on the bike and whether he did it with the help of something. But there's no argument about what he's done off the bike. But he's one of the greatest philanthropists and the greatest cancer activists that we've seen, and that's not varnished, that's not, something that's just made up. That's real.
But but his cycling career has been the springboard that has allowed him to do that.
Fair enough, but that doesn't mean that he hasn't done it.
I agree.
How many other cyclists have? I mean,
agree
it's
completely.
really amazing what he does.
Yeah. Have you spoken to him within the past 24 hours, and how is he feeling, and what impact has this had on him, if so?
Almost none, to be honest with you. I have spoken with him frequently because a week from this weekend here in Austin, Texas, where I'm speaking to you from, where Lance lives, and where the headquarters of the his Lance Armstrong Foundation is, it's the 15th anniversary, and we're quite busy with the preparations for that. So he's meeting currently. I just got off the phone with him. He's meeting currently with the board over at the Lance Armstrong Foundation, and he's planning those activities. And when he said he was through with this and with USADA, he really did mean it. So he's focused on that.
And from a personal point for you, before we let you go, what have the past 24 hours been like?
Well, they've been a little crazy, to be honest with you. They really have been. But I consider Lance Armstrong to be my friend and my client, and I have no problems answering questions and defending Lance Armstrong. I can assure you that.
Sean, we appreciate your time. Thank you very much for joining us on the programme.
Mr. O'Mara, it's a pleasure, sir.
Thank you indeed. Sean Breen, who is Lance Armstrong's lawyer, joining us from Austin.